All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's information meeting for 723 Putney in the Fernbank area. So this isn't too far from the intersection of Robert Grant and Abbott Street. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists, the people who you see on your screen right now. We have Kathy Rigas joining us from the City of Ottawa's Planning Department, and Kathy is the planner for this file. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
We have Vincent Denham, who's representing Claridge. Claridge is the builder, the applicant for this project. So welcome, Vincent. And from my City Hall team, Jordan Moffat is here, and Jordan's going to be helping out with the Q&A and moderation for tonight. So that's a good chance to explain how this is going to work. For residents who are joining us today, we have a couple ways that you can participate, that you can share feedback or ask a question tonight. One of those is if you'd like to ask a question yourself, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom. So if you look on the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button. You can put your hand up, and when we get to the Q&A session, we'll come to you live and you can ask your question or share your feedback. If you prefer, you can also use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen and type in your question, and Jordan will be able to ask that on your behalf. So the plan for tonight is we're going to have a brief presentation from Kathy and then from Vincent, and then we will go to Q&A and answer as many questions as we can during the hour that we have approximately. I will say, I just want to thank people who are attending tonight and also our panelists. These meetings are a really good opportunity to really give residents a good idea of what these applications are all about. I know there's all sorts of information shared on the City of Ottawa's website, but it can also be often be very dense technical information. I know it's sometimes hard to really decipher what's being proposed, and there's always some specific questions from the neighborhood that aren't necessarily covered in the official documents. So these meetings are a really good opportunity to bring these applications alive and really give people a good sense of what's being proposed. So with that, I will hand it over to Kathy, and she's got a quick introduction about the planning process here. Kathy.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So I'm Kathy Rigas. I'm the planner in development review who is handling this site plan application. So when we say a site plan application, that's where we get a proposal to develop the site, and a site plan is always something that complies with the existing zoning that's in effect. So basically a site plan is, in that sort of process, we are looking at the layout of the buildings on the site, the landscaping, the servicing, those types of things. So in terms of the process we go through for an application like that, at this point, we received the application a couple of months ago around Christmas time, and we do what's called a technical circulation and public notification. So I send out notice of the application and a link to all the plans to approximately 50 different city departments and external agencies, such as the utilities, the Conservation Authority. And everyone has 4 weeks to comment. In terms of public notification for site plans, we post a big notice sign on the property, and we notify the community association. Some of you may have received like a letter when it's something for a rezoning application. We don't do that for site plans because they comply with zoning, so the property is developing as we expected, so there's less need for any consultation. So the next step is I receive all the comments from the technical agencies and any public comments, if there are any, and we prepare a synopsis of all those comments and give it to the applicant. So there may be minor revisions that are requested. So in this case, I have provided that comment letter to Claridge. And so there may be some minor revisions made in response to some of the technical comments. In this case, there was, I could say, nothing major. They were minor comments that were requested. So typically the application would come back with what we call a second submission, where they incorporate the revisions that we asked for. We review that, and the next step is that we prepare an approval report. And so the plans are finalized, and we finalize what's called conditions of approval. So those are typically standard conditions that an applicant has to meet once their plan is approved. So that's all with just essentially doing all the work in accordance with what was approved. So I will prepare a staff report, what's called a delegated authority report, recommending approval. It lists all the site plan, landscape plan, grading, servicing, the building elevations, everything that we have approved is listed there. And then we send that report for what's called concurrence. So it's sent to both the councillor and the owner, and they both have to approve with, agree with the conditions of approval. And then once we have concurrence, the development review manager approves the application. And in terms of the public, we send a notice to any members of the public who commented. And so after the approval, the next steps have to do specifically with the owner, where they, our legal department prepares a site plan agreement, and the owner has to enter into that agreement, which basically binds them to developing in accordance with the plans. So that's the site plan process. Next slide, please, Jordan. So just in terms of the property itself, so this is 723 Putney. It's shown with the big star. So the property is located on the east side of Putney Crescent. To the north is the Hydro Corridor. To the west is Robert Grant Avenue, and to the south is a pedestrian pathway that was created through the subdivision process. So this site is located in CRT's Westwood Phase 1 subdivision. And so you can see the surrounding area where the singles and townhouses are all shown. The yellow lines are the lotting fabric, and the red lines are the zoning. So you can see the zoning all along Robert Grant. This is the first of those parcels to develop. And next slide, please. So this is the Fernbank Community Design Plan, and I'm sure as everybody knows, this property and the subdivision are all within what we call the Fernbank Community Design Plan. So this was overall concept approved by City Council in 2009 for the development of what's called the Fernbank community, which ultimately will have about 11 or 12,000 houses and 30,000 people. So it covered all the area from the existing easterly limit of Stittsville up to Terry Fox Drive, Fernbank on the south, up to Hazeldean Road on the north. So the property we're talking about is right here with the red arrow. And in the CDP, it's designated as medium density residential. That's the sort of orangey color along both sides of Robert Grant here. So that was intended for slightly higher density than, say, regular singles or townhouses. Typically, it would be back-to-back townhouses, stacked units, or low-rise apartments up to 4 stories. Next slide, please. And this shows the zoning map. Whoop, sorry, one back. Yeah, thanks. So this site is zoned R4Z. So the R4 zone, residential 4th density. And as I just mentioned, it allows back-to-back townhouses, stacked units, or low-rise apartments up to 4 stories. So that applies to all of these blocks on the west side of Robert Grant. So this is the first one to develop. But as we move forward, these other parcels will probably develop with something similar. That's what was intended along this side of Robert Grant. So that's pretty much everything in terms of the process and just sort of the policies that are in place. So as I mentioned, this proposal is for back-to-back townhouses. It complies with the R4 zone. So there are no zoning issues. And now I'll turn it over to Vincent to describe the specifics of the proposal.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, councillors. So yeah, my name is Vincent Deneme. I work for Claridge Homes. We're the property owner and the development proponent here. So the slide you're seeing here is the proposed product that we're thinking of or proposing to build. It's a back-to-back townhouse unit. So basically it's a townhouse mirrored on itself. So it's basically a townhouse with no backyard. You still have a garage. They're 3 stories, and we are proposing roughly 112 residential units. So yeah. So they'll be built off of Putney Crescent as a part of a planned unit development. And the subject site right now, it's vacant, so it's just reserved for development. And we're now moving forward now that the subdivision is registered. Along with the units, we're proposing 183 parking spaces. So those are in the garage, your driveway, and then we have some visitor parking kind of peppered around the site, because this is going to be a private street, so no on-street parking will be allowed. Next slide. So yeah, this is the site plan showing the layout of the units. So as you can see, the proposed development will be in a network of private streets in a crescent form, just to keep everything efficient. And it will have, I think it's curbside pickup for garbage. Yeah, basically it. Open to any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Vincent. So once again, if you are tuned in as a resident listening in on the call and you have a question, you can either raise your hand and we'll come to you live for the question, or you can type in your question to the Q&A panel and we'll be able to read that out and get an answer for you on the call today. While we're waiting for any questions that might come in, I have a couple that I wanted to start with. One was just the architecture or the models of homes, these 3-story stacked townhomes. Are there any similar ones in the Fernbank area or in the West End, Kanata or Stittsville, that would be comparable to what you're proposing here?
I believe we're right across the street. I think it's Phoenix Homes on the east side of Robert Grant would have a similar product. So those are the same kind of stacked townhome units. I believe they're freehold, so they'd be very, very similar in height and built form.
Okay. I have a few more, but oh, sorry, Kathy, you were gonna.
I was just gonna say, I believe the Phoenix ones on livery are like stacked units where they're not individual, like straight up and down individually owned units. They're like, one is the semi-basement and ground floor, and then there's one above that with the second and third floor. Whereas these are, you know, straight up and down. They're not stacked on each other. These are back-to-back townhouses. So I don't believe Claridge has any, but a little bit farther north in the Fernbank community, Mattamy has built some in the Abbotsville Crossing subdivision. They do back-to-backs like that. And they are other, you know, other areas throughout the city with this. It's a new product that's very attractive in terms of an entry-level product. They're less expensive than buying a townhouse with a full backyard. So as Vincent said, they're townhouse backing onto another townhouse. The amenity area is the balcony that's over the garage, but they are, you know, a full 3 stories where you own the whole thing, and then you have a neighbor on either side and on the back. But it's the kind of product that we wanted to see, like in the R4 zone, that's meant to accommodate a little higher density than just regular, you know, freehold townhouses with a yard. So this is the kind of thing we wanted to see along Robert Grant, because we didn't want individual townhomes fronting onto Putney with a big, like a noise wall along Robert Grant. So we wanted something slightly higher medium density that fit within the block, but not individual yards onto Robert Grant.
Yeah, in general, in that Fernbank community design plan, the closer you are to Robert Grant and the closer you are to Abbott Street or to Hazeldean, the higher the densities tend to be in the master plan.
That's right. And there are some other, they're not back-to-backs, but some of the, like the low-rise apartments that are farther south on Fernbank, like are farther south on Robert Grant, close to Fernbank, like EQ and I think Phoenix both have some 4-story apartment buildings. And that's all in the same zone. So that would have been allowed here too. And like you said, we didn't want singles or townhouses right up against Robert Grant. So those blocks were intended to be something different that developed as, you know, what Vincent called a planned unit development. So it's sort of a combined development on the block, not individual lots.
Okay. Jordan, I think there's some questions coming in. I'll leave it over to you.
All right, we have a first question in the chat is about the parking provided. I'll just read it out here. The parking ratio seems low for such residences. Other areas in this type of home have had people parking on the street. How will this be addressed so that parking doesn't spill out onto Putney?
Vincent, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, I think I misspelled the parking ratio. So it's actually two spaces per unit. And then we have additional visitor parking because there's no on-street parking. So you'll have a spot in your garage and your driveway. And then I believe we have something like 25 visitor spots for any spillover that may cause.
Kathy?
I was going to say, I can just confirm that they're meeting the parking requirement on a townhouse. The parking requirement is 1 per unit, and they're providing basically 2 spaces, as Vincent mentioned, 1 in the garage and then 1 in the driveway. And visitor parking is not required in this kind of development. This is what's called a planned unit development because it's all one lot essentially. And where there's individual garages and driveways, no visitor parking is required. So some people may park on Putney, but if people on Putney have a visitor, they park on Putney as well. So there's no problem with some people, like visitors, for example, choosing to park on the street. But the development, all that visitor parking is above and beyond what's required by the bylaw. So that's all extra.
Okay, Jordan?
All right, next question is about pedestrian facilities. And maybe we can talk about there's a pathway through the middle here, but will we be addressing safety of foot traffic prior to construction of these units? For example, the completion of the footpath on Finsbury that passes through the hydro corridor to the TCT/Abbott to allow people a construction-free walk, or students a construction-free walk to schools.
Sorry, what's the question? I'm a little fuzzy what they're asking.
I'll ask it again. It's just about foot traffic, either the circulation on the site now or during construction, specifically about the footpath on Finsbury that passes through the hydro corridor to the Trans-Canada Trail during construction.
If I could add maybe some color to that, because I know this neighborhood fairly well. There are a lot of families living here already, and I think the concern is about there's unfinished sidewalks and unfinished pathways that are already in the plans. So would those be finished, or can those be finished before the construction begins, so that people can walk to and from nearby schools, for example, or to nearby amenities safely?
Perhaps Vincent has an idea, like when some of those items might be finished, but
to be honest, I'm not sure about the Finsbury extension up to the Trans-Canada Trail. We would have to either expropriate or work with Hydro One to complete that, and they're a bit difficult and hard to reach. So that I'm not too sure about the timing, but the internal sidewalks, we're hoping to finish all of them in the spring within the subdivision. So hopefully that will help. But right now, because of the housing construction within the site, some areas we don't put the sidewalks in before we build the house, so we don't wreck the sidewalks with our machinery. But I could definitely take that away and see if we can look into that pathway through the hydro corridor.
Yeah, there's one at Angel Heights that's planned to go through. Actually, there was a map up before that showed all the connections. And
Angel Heights and then Finsbury as well. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because I think this is one of the comments I submitted formally on this file, was about adding a pathway link on the north part of the site. So I don't know, Jordan, if you can put up a map, it might be easier to explain.
Yeah, I'll put that up. That will show the potential pathways too.
So what's the potential, or are there any reasons we couldn't do an additional pathway on the north part of the property?
You mean up here? There's already, there is a public pathway now where the stars are shown. That's a public pathway connecting with Clapham Terrace out to Robert Grant. So I don't think we would encourage like a public pathway through this private site, that people can connect through this pathway. And there may be a connection like for the residents in this development. There may be a pathway out to Robert Grant, but it's not intended to draw people from the neighborhood through the site out to Robert Grant, or to dedicate, for example, another public pathway through this parcel, because we already have the path along the southerly limit. So that is like a public pathway block that was dedicated at the time of the subdivision. So it's 6 meters wide, meant to have a 2-meter asphalt path and fencing on either side. So there was no intent, for example, to have a connection from this site to the path, or that people would be cutting through to get to Robert Grant.
Okay, well, something I'd like to explore a bit offline. So kind of extending where Putney Crescent is labeled now, because there is a desire line right now that people use informally. So just something we can look at as we go through this. Jordan, back over to you with questions from residents.
Okay, we have a pretty simple question here. What is the timeline for this development?
We're looking to, depending on the city approvals, but shovels in the ground this fall to start housing construction in the winter. And yeah, just more on that path, like the grading's a bit harsh to have a pathway there. There's actually a big pipe that goes through there, and it's actually a city easement, and there's a big manhole at the end. And we'd have like a retaining wall where the visitor parking is, with some pretty steep terracing. So I don't know if there'd be room on our property, maybe on the city easement, but I don't know if the city's going to want that in case anything happens to that pipe.
Okay, next question. How safe is the site as it's next to the hydro lines?
You mean like as far as the effects of power lines? I mean, we follow the Hydro 1 guidelines on when it comes to setbacks. So the hydro corridor is wide enough for, I guess, the safety of residents around that neighborhood.
Would there be any review by Hydro, for example, Kathy, through the planning process? Are they one of the stakeholders that get circulated on these? Or
yes. So both Hydro Ottawa and Hydro 1 are circulated on these applications, and they just send standard comment. It's a standard suite of conditions. So there's nothing unusual here.
And if I'm reading the plans correctly, this development would be further south, or at least as far south from the hydro lines as any existing homes along Putney right now.
Yes, the hydro line, like if we go back to my air photo, we can see where the hydro corridor is. So I don't know, Jordan, if you want to put the zoning map back up, maybe? Not zoning, the air photo.
Yep.
The one well, that works
this one here,
too.
Kathy?
Either this or the one before it, but you can see this is the hydro corridor. Sorry, the one before that, right here.
Right.
So this is the parcel. The red is the zoning line. So everything north of that red line, zoned 01, that is the hydro corridor. So basically there's all these houses that back onto the hydro corridor. So they're really, as close as anything in this site will be, and that's already been developed. So when the Fernbank CDP was developed, Hydro 1 was a stakeholder in the plan, and all of this is developing as expected. So from our perspective, there's no hydro issues.
Okay, Jordan.
Okay, next question is about, oh, sorry, Vincent, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention that there'll be fencing all along the hydro corridor, so no one can access it or go under the power lines. And I don't think they're the high tension interprovincial type of power lines, but.
Okay, next question is about traffic, specifically traffic along Putney and Bobolink. Were they sized to handle the increase in traffic from these housing?
I can answer that. Basically, there's no increase there's an increase from now only because the site is undeveloped, but it's not an increase in terms of what was planned because these sites are zoned R4. So we knew it would be back-to-back stacks or low-rise apartments. So essentially all these units that are being built, that's exactly what we expected. And the road pattern took that into account. And when CRT did the subdivision, they had to do a full traffic impact analysis for the subdivision. And through that, their traffic engineers have to generate potential traffic generated by each parcel based on its zoning. So all of that was taken into account at the time of the subdivision. So there's no increase from our perspective. I mean, like I said, there's an increase compared to nothing being there, but the increase is exactly what we expected. So there's no traffic issue, basically.
Okay. Jordan, any more resident questions?
We are currently at the bottom of the barrel for questions, so we'll see. Maybe we'll get another one now that I've mentioned that we don't have any.
Well, I will ask one, and it's about the fact that these will be private streets. Vincent, can you talk a little bit about a little more about what a private street would be versus a public street, and why in this case Claridge has decided to go the private street direction?
Right. So private street has, I guess, less requirements as a public street. So mainly the width. We can go down to 6.7 meters to accommodate fire trucks, and then we don't need to add like a 4-meter boulevard for utilities and hydrants and all that. So we contain everything, and then we own everything up until we sell the site. So we're not sure how we're going to divvy it up yet. It might be a PODL or a common elements condominium, where you'll have an R plan that defines the road, and then each resident would have a proportionate share in that road. And then once maybe more than half of the residents move in, we would turn it over to them, and then they would have monthly fees for snow clearing and power, like hydro accounts for the street lights and such. And then I guess liability insurance for the road.
Okay. Jordan?
Okay, we do have another 2 more questions that came in. The first one might be for Glenn and Kathy. When will Robert Grant be extended to Palladium?
I can start on that. So right now, well, I should actually go back. Robert Grant Avenue is intended to be the main north-south route for people who live in Fernbank to get all the way from Fernbank Road to Palladium Drive and the Queensway. Right now, as everyone knows, it's only constructed from Fernbank Road to Abbott Street. And then to go further north towards Palladium, it's going to be done in phases. The northernmost part of that is actually under construction now as part of another development, the part closest to Palladium Drive. So over the next few months, you'll see more work happening there. They're going to be adding a roundabout and so on. But we've still got this big gap from basically, let's say from around Huntmar Drive, Maple Grove, all the way to Hazeldean Road, and then to Abbott Street. Likely the next phase to be built would be Abbott Street to Hazeldean Road. And that's going to be done as construction of the land around there progresses. That's a piece of land known as the Cazell land. So Cazell is the landowner. And as there's new homes being built there, we will see Robert Grant being built. I hesitate to put a date on that, but I suspect that will likely be in the next 3 to 5 years for that section to be built. For the section north of there, from Hazeldean Road northwards, at this point in the city's planning and funding, it could be as late as 2029, but it is something that I'm working with my team to accelerate, because I know this is the biggest transportation corridor in Stittsville, arguably in Stittsville and Canada South, and it's incredibly important to provide the mobility that we need as more and more people move into the neighborhood. Because I know the congestion, the volume of traffic that is being forced onto Iber and Huntmar is really not sustainable as it is now. Those roads were never designed to handle that many vehicles. The other thing that I want to point out too, in terms of transportation, is phase 3 of light rail is designed and planned to come all the way to Hazeldean Road. And then from Hazeldean Road all the way to Fernbank along this Robert Grant route would be bus rapid transit. And there is a plan to have a bus rapid transit station basically across the street from the 73 Putney site on the other side of Robert Grant Road, near Robert Grant and Abbott. Timeline for that is at least a decade away, and there's not a certainty around when that will be, but that's part of the Fernbank Community Design Plan that is driving all of the growth in this area. Kathy, if you wanted to add anything else to that very long answer.
No, I think so. That was a great answer. I think you've covered everything that I could have said. So thank you. I have nothing else to add. That's all the situation.
I'll add that it is, I have a list of ward priorities in my office, and it's at the top of the list because it's incredibly important to not only get this built, but get it built ahead of what the current schedule is. And the city's going through a big process called a review of the Transportation Master Plan. And if this is something that's important to you, please watch my email newsletter on my website. I often share information about how you can get involved in sharing feedback or answering surveys. And it's really important that our city planners and the transportation department hear from Stittsville residents about the transportation needs out here. So I'll continue to share that information for residents so you can get involved. And ultimately, that's how we're going to move Robert Grant up the priority list.
Okay, I have two questions here, and they're both kind of follow-up questions from previous questions. The first one for Vincent, can you clarify when the project you expect it to be completed?
Yeah, like if we start housing construction in early 2022, depending on sales, it could be done late 2022, so in the fall.
Okay, and the other one was in terms of the private roads. Can you clarify what that means in terms of maintenance and costs? Do the tenants pay for those type of things?
Yeah, so what the purchasers will have in their agreement will be a sort of a co-tenancy agreement that sets out all the common elements, who's like what is common element, what is private. So what happens is that the back-to-backs will be freehold, but the street will actually be private. And it'll be owned by either a condominium corporation, or each homeowner would have a proportionate share in that street. And then there'll be monthly fees, like for a reserve fund if anything happens, snow clearing, like I said, the hydro accounts for the street lights, liability insurance. So there's a monthly fee when you're on a private street. It's way less than a condo because the Condominium Act has a lot more stringent rules and reporting for accounting and stuff like that. So, you know, our recent projects have been $100 to $120 a month to maintain everything.
Okay, well, I'm once again out of questions. So if you have a question that you are really excited to ask, now is your time.
Well, I will do a bit of a wrap up, and then if anything comes in before the end, Jordan, we'll go to that. I actually wanted to share my screen. And let's see, there's the web browser. I wanted to show you a couple things on my website if you're watching tonight. First of all, there's a development tab here on the top. And if you're interested in learning more about local developments in Stittsville and all over the city, but we're interested here in Stittsville first and foremost, there is a map of all of the active development applications. Some of these are on hold, some of these have already been approved, but you can get a sense of what is in the pipe near you. And then if you scroll down below, you can see detailed information about each one, including upcoming public meetings. We do have a number of meetings coming up about development and other issues. We have next week on Tuesday night, we're doing a special counselor chat, not about development specifically, but if you have any questions about issues in the Stittsville neighborhood, you can join us on Zoom or on Facebook for that. On the 11th, May 11th, we are doing a Q&A with people from the city's transportation department about active transportation. And we're trying to identify missing links in Ottawa's sidewalks and recreation paths. So if that's of interest to you, that's on May the 11th. And then we have a number of information meetings like this one for upcoming development files, but you can see all the information here on this website. The other thing I wanted to show you was this newsletter tab If you haven't already, please sign up for my email newsletter because I do share updates anytime there's new development applications or meetings planned. Also information about COVID-19 and vaccines and testing sites and any other news that might be happening in around the community. So we have about 5,000 subscribers to that now. So it's a great way to keep up to date on what's happening in your community. Any other questions that came in, Jordan, while I was doing my
Yes.
there? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Last question.
Okay. Are the public allowed to access the private streets?
I guess, like, from the city's perspective, I would say they're allowed, but there'd be no reason to go there because it's not, there will not be a connection to Robert Grant to serve the public. So it's like the term private means that they are privately maintained, essentially. It doesn't mean that no one else is allowed to drive down it. But given that these are individual crescents only serving those particular houses, there's really no reason for anyone to drive down them unless they're visiting someone on the street, because they don't go anywhere. It's just a series of loop roads that come from Putney, go around and come out at another spot on Putney. But the term private street is meant that it's not a public street. Public street is dedicated to the city. And like Vincent explained, if you have a public street, you have the width of asphalt, but then you also have the city boulevard of several meters on each side. So in Fernbank, the public streets are 18 meters wide. So there's the asphalt and then typically a sidewalk, boulevard on each side. So altogether it adds up to 18 meters, whereas here these streets will be approximately 6.7. So they're effectively the width of asphalt that the fire department needs for a fire truck. That's why, so there's no parking allowed. And that's a standard on private streets. And private street is something that's very common in the city. It's not, this isn't something unusual. We see a lot of these developments that are done on private streets, and it's either a condo or the common elements, like a non-condo group, but those residents are responsible for plowing the street. If something goes wrong with the infrastructure underneath, it's a private responsibility. None of the servicing, the roadway, nothing is municipally owned. So that's what we mean by private.
I could still walk my dog around the block.
Yes,
if I wanted
yes.
to.
Yes, it doesn't mean that no one's allowed on it. It just means it's privately maintained and the street is not dedicated to the city.
Okay. Jordan?
You want to do one more?
Well, I see a couple in the queue. We have time.
Yeah, we have two more. So they're kind of a similar theme, so I'll just put them all at once. Are there any commercial units planned around the area? And are there any parks planned for this development or around the area?
Well, I could take a stab at that one. Across the street from this site, on the east side of Robert Grant, there is land that is zoned mixed use. So there's a potential that that could be anything, a mix of residential and or retail commercial, or it could be just residential, or it could be commercial. One parcel of that land is currently going through the approval process, which is 1000 Robert Grant Avenue, which is being developed by Lepine, and they want to build a few apartment towers there. They haven't decided yet whether at the base of that tower, whether or not they'll include commercial. I hope they do, because in some of their other sites, they've included a coffee shop or a hair salon or local amenities that are really useful to residents. So there's no confirmed planned commercial nearby in this general Robert Grant area. There could be in the future. It is one thing I think, if we look back to what the community design plan intended in this area, I think the resulting development has fallen a little bit short, because I think we really do lack small neighborhood commercial in the middle of the Fernbank area. Certainly we've got the Walmart Plaza, Fernbank and Terry Fox. We've got further north at Hazeldean, and you have some, some businesses on Iber Road that you might call local commercial, but we really don't have a lot within walking distance in the central part of the Fernbank area. As for the parks, there's no park plan for this site specifically, but because of that, Claridge will be required to pay into what's called a cash in lieu parkland fund. So they're going to be contributing a fairly sizable amount of money. I don't know, Vincent, if you know how much that would come to, approximately a ballpark. I mean, it's in the tens of thousands of dollars that they'll be required to contribute into a parks fund. And that will go for future parks and park amenities in Stittsville and to some extent citywide. So in Stittsville, some of that money would be used for things like probably the acquisition of Shea Woods, which is the cedar forest area a little bit west of this site. And also there's a large district park that is planned on Abbott Street, just a little bit east of the roundabout that's there right now. So that's a future Fernbank District Park, a really large park with, it'll have a lot of sports facilities and kids playgrounds and so on. So this is the kind of thing where this cash in lieu fund goes to support more parkland in the area. So not immediately on site, but for future green space and parks nearby.
And just to clarify, on this site, Claridge or CRT has already met their parkland requirement through the subdivision because this, as I've said a few times, this site is developing as we expected. So the densities were calculated at the time of the subdivision. So in CRT's Westwood subdivision, we have the Putney Woods Park, and then there's also the larger community park at the corner of Dagenham. So that's part of the parkland dedication for the subdivision. So the parkland is there, and then that was done the units in this development were counted towards that.
Okay. Yeah, I wish we had handy the parks plan for the area, because Putney Park is the only one built so far on the west side of Robert Grant, but there's quite a few parks that are coming.
There will be a bigger one right at the corner of Copes, so that will be coming soon.
Yeah. Jordan, any more questions before we wrap this up for tonight?
We are once again out of questions.
Okay. Every time you say that, we get like 2 or 3 more. We will stop there. I want to thank residents for attending and for the great questions. And we've also seen some comments in the chat as well. So thank you for your comments and feedback. If you have questions that you didn't ask tonight or that you think of after the fact, you can email me at glenn.gower@ottawa.ca. You can email Kathy as well, kathy.rigas@ottawa.ca. All of that information is on my website, glenngower.ca. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jordan. And I hope everyone has a good night. Take care. Bye.